What's up? It's Debbie, and I am back with more true crimes of criminal minds. If this is your first time to my channel, welcome. What I do is I talk about a criminal minds episode, then I talk about a true crime case that's either mentioned in the episode, similar to the episode, or sometimes the episode is actually based on a true crime. And to all my returning viewers, welcome back. I appreciate you. I'm glad you're back. And today we're going to be talking about Season 2, Episode 9, and it's called The Last Word. This one is not one of my favorites. I don't really know why. This episode is about two serial killers working in the same area at the same time. In the episode, they actually communicate with one another through classified ads. The killer that I'm going to talk about today did not do that. They did end up in jail together, though, so they did meet each other, but they didn't know each other before that. The other killer is Herbert Mullen, and I did an episode on him back in Season 1. But today we're going to be talking about Edmund Kemper III, otherwise known as the coed killer. This is one I didn't know very much about. Pretty much all I knew about him, I learned from Mindhunter on Netflix. There's only 2 seasons. It got canceled, but it's a very good show, and it's worth a watch if you're into true crime. It is about the beginning of the BAU, which back then was called the BSU, and at the time, the term serial killer hadn't even been invented yet. The show follows, they have character names that aren't the real people's names, but they make it very obvious that that's who they're based on. So John Douglas is played by Jonathan Groff, Ann Burgess is played by Anna Torv, and Robert Ressler is played by Holt McElhaney. And they were the very first FBI agents to go into prisons and start interviewing these serial killers to see if they could pinpoint similarities that might make it easier for them to catch them in the future. So all I knew about Ed Kemper was that he killed his grandparents when he was 15. And I was like, well, but why is he called the coed killer? So I didn't even know anything about the women that he killed until I started this. And a lot of it is very, very disturbing. Like, I've done content warnings before, but guys, this one, and I'm going to have to allude to some things to keep it YouTube friendly. And I also really don't want to say those words over and over again. So, yeah. The only other thing I knew about Kemper was that he was a very tall man. He was 6'9". He weighed 13 pounds at birth. He was 6'4" when he was 15. This was a big guy. And I still don't know why the girls weren't afraid of him because of his size.
In 1972 and 1973, a series of murders shocked Northern California. College girls began to disappear while hitchhiking. 2 of the victims were picked up from the campus of the University of California at Santa Cruz. That's where Ed Kemper's mother was working as an administrative assistant.
He is played in Mindhunter by Cameron Britton, who was also in Umbrella Academy, so you might know him. He's a very good actor, does a very good job. Here's what Ann Burgess had to say about her interactions with Ed Kemper. Quote, Ed Kemper, if you will, was very enjoyable to talk to. He was very articulate. He had a voice that carried well, that I guess sold well. He had enough of a personality that wouldn't offend people, unlike some of the other people who were clearly offensive. He was very personable and didn't appear to hold back. He also knew exactly when his fantasies for killing started. End quote. He was also interviewed by Robert Ressler and John Douglas. They are the inspiration for Gideon and Rossi on Criminal Minds. Kemper scared Robert Ressler very badly once. It was a little something that Ed liked to do. He did it whenever he got interviewed for fun. He thought, I'll just freak him out a little bit. So there was a panic button underneath the table that the interviewer was to push when they were ready to leave. Or, if he needed to panic, he pushed the panic button. So Ed said, quote, "If I went apeshit in here, you'd be in a lot of trouble, wouldn't you? I could screw your head off and place it on the table to greet the guards." End quote. Yeah, I think that would scare me too. What's even scarier is that the guards didn't enter the room for 30 minutes. They should have a panic button and an emergency panic button. Edmund Kemper was born in Burbank, California on December 18th, 1948. He was the middle child of two sisters, and his parents were Edmund Jr. and Clarnell Kemper. His dad was a World War II vet. After the war, he tested nuclear weapons at the Pacific Proving Grounds. He said this about his wife, quote, "Suicide missions in wartime and the atomic bomb testings were nothing compared to living with Clarnell," end quote. And he said that she affected him, quote, "more than 396 days and nights of fighting on the front did," end quote. They divorced in 1972 when Ed was 9 and his mother moved with the kids to Helena, Montana. His mother was a neurotic, domineering alcoholic who showed no affection to her son because she thought it would turn him gay. She was abusive, and she made him sleep in a rat-infested basement every night, locking him in because she feared that he would do something to his sisters. Ed was a strange child. When he was 13 years old, he buried his sister's cat alive, then dug it back up and decapitated it. When asked if he killed the cat, he lied and derived great pleasure from it. He would cut off the heads of his sister's dolls, too. His childhood games with his sisters consisted of pretending to be in a gas chamber or electric chair. He would have his sisters tie him to a chair and he would pretend to be electrocuted or gassed. That is one thing I've never heard any other serial killer say. They never had games like that. Or if they did, they kept them to themselves. I find that extremely bizarre. Like, do you think maybe he thought that's how he was going to leave this world? I just don't. Another weird thing he did, he would sneak out of the house with his father's bayonet. And he would take his bayonet and go peep into a second grade teacher's house. I don't know what he was going to do with the bayonet, but he never did anything with it, thank God. But now this is a common thing that serial killers do when they're children or very young. They go peep in windows. So that part doesn't surprise me, but what was the bayonet for? He almost died twice. Once when his sister pushed him in front of a train, and once when his sister pushed him in the deep end of a pool. He almost drowned. And I don't know if it was the same sister or which sister. I guess his sisters wanted to be just like their mother when they grew up. I don't know. When Ed was 14, he ran away from home because he couldn't take his mother's abuse any longer. So he ran away to his dad's house. His dad lived in Los Angeles, but his dad had remarried and had a son. And his stepmother said that Ed creeped her out because he followed her around the house and he always wanted to close the curtains because he always said it was too bright in there. So she told Ed's dad that he was giving her migraines and he had to go. So he sent him to live with his parents, his grandparents, in North Fork, California, which is the exact center of California. I didn't know states kept track of the exact center of their state, but there's a great big sign. Living with his grandparents wasn't any better than living with his mother because his paternal grandmother was just as abusive and cruel as his mother had been. He loved his grandfather, though. They got along fine. And his grandfather taught him how to hunt and bought a .22 caliber rifle for him. But then Ed started shooting birds with it just to shoot birds, not hunting for meat, not using it with a purpose, just other than wreaking havoc. So his grandfather took it away from him. But Ed eventually talked him into giving it back to him. On August 27th, 1964, after an argument with his grandmother, he went upstairs, he got his rifle, came back down and shot her. His grandfather wasn't home, so he just sat there and waited for his grandfather. And when his grandfather got home, because he didn't want to put him through the pain of knowing that his grandson had killed his wife, he shot his dad too before he could even get up onto the porch and know what was going on. Later, the cops asked him why he did it, and he said, "Oh, I just wanted to know what it felt like." After he shot them, he didn't know what to do, so he called his mother, and she said, "Call the police," which he did, and then he sat there and he waited for the police. The court psychiatrist diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. He was sent to Atascadero State Hospital. The doctors there disagreed with the court's findings that he was schizophrenic. Instead, they diagnosed him with a personality trait disturbance, passive-aggressive type. This diagnosis was less severe than the schizophrenia diagnosis. Ed was a model prisoner. His IQ was tested at 136, then retested at 145. He became very close to the staff, and he would do things to make himself likable to them. Eventually, he was given the job of helping administer tests to the other patients. By doing this, he was able to figure out how to fool the tests that were given to him. He was released from Atascadero on December 18, 1969, his 21st birthday. His record was expunged on November 28, 1972. He had a clean record now. He was released to his mother, although the doctor said it was a bad idea because the relationship was so toxic, but he went back to live with his mother anyway. His mom had moved back to California to the city of Santa Cruz after her third divorce. She worked for the University of California at Santa Cruz as an administrative assistant. Ed worked a few odd jobs and got a position with the Department of Transportation in 1971. He also briefly went to community college. He wanted to be a cop, but he was too tall. He saved up enough money to get an apartment with a friend in Alameda, but his mother continued to be controlling, calling him all the time and making surprise visits. He met and became engaged to a 16-year-old high school student, and she broke up with him after he was arrested. Yeah, I would have too. That's a no-brainer. Ed started hanging out at a cop bar called the Jury Room. I think that's an awesome name for a cop bar. He made friends with the cops. They thought he was just a nice guy, just a regular nice guy. He listened to them talk about their jobs, talk about forensics, talk about all kinds of stuff that helped him in his endeavors. They were even talking about the serial killer that was picking up hitchhiking girls and killing them. They thought he was just a nice guy. They had no idea that he was involved in any of it. He had a motorcycle, and he got hit by a car, and he broke his arm. He must have broken it pretty badly because he lost his job because he couldn't work, and he moved back in with his mother. He won a civil suit against the driver and was awarded $15,000, which is around $98,883 today. He bought a yellow 1969 Ford Galaxy with some of the money. This became his murder vehicle. He stocked it with plastic bags, blankets, knives, and handcuffs. He noticed that there were a lot of hitchhikers in Santa Cruz and started picking them up and dropping them off. At first, he just wanted someone to talk to. He estimates that he picked up over 150 women before he started killing. Between May of 1972 and April of 1973, he killed 8 women, 5 college students, 1 high school student, his mother, and his mother's best friend. He called his urges little zappies. Here's the part where I need to censor myself. I hope you get what I am trying to say. He didn't want to do anything to them if they were still alive. The essay was after. He would get in arguments with his mother and go for a drive afterwards, and that was when he would pick up the girls. His mother had been his real target the entire time. He said, quote, "My victims represented not what my mother was, but what she liked, what she coveted, what was most important to her, and I was destroying it." He would shoot, stab, smother, or strangle his victims. His first two coed murders on May 7, 1972, were Mary Ann Pesky and Anita Lucchesa. They were 18-year-old Fresno State University students hitchhiking to Stanford University, which was about 2 hours away. But Ed told them to go ahead and get in. If he would take them, it would be fine. After about an hour, Ed pulled over to a wooded area near Alameda. There he handcuffed Pesky and put Lucchesa in the trunk. He accidentally touched Pesky's breast and apologized to her because she was still alive. He stabbed and strangled both of them in the trunk. On the way home, he was stopped by a cop for a broken taillight. He was 100% ready to kill that cop if he had to. And I think he wanted to, because he even told the cop, "Well, you can look in the trunk if you want to." If that cop had looked in the trunk, he would have been just as dead as the girls. The cop just gave him a warning, told him to fix his taillight, and let him go. And he took the bodies home, and that's when he did that stuff that I don't want to talk about. He did that to all of them, so I really don't want to say that every time. He put the remains in plastic bags and dumped them near Loma Prieta Mountain. In August, Pesky's skull was found. They had to use dental records to identify her. On September 14, 1972, 15-year-old Aiko Koo hitchhiking home from dance class after she missed her bus. Ed saw her and picked her up. He pulled over into a remote area and pulled a gun on her. Somehow, he accidentally locked himself out of the car. She was locked in the car, and the gun was in the car. And she let him back in. That is one thing I don't understand. Why did she let him back in?
I lived as an ordinary person most of my life, even though I was living a parallel and increasingly sick life, other life. One victim let me back in the car. I locked myself out. She opened the door for me.
There's not a lot of exceptions. He probably did most of them the same way. This one was different. She was still alive. He choked her until she was unconscious. Then he did his thing. Then he killed her. He put her in the trunk of his car. He drove to his favorite bar, the jury room, went inside to have a drink with his cop buddies. He even excused himself at one point and came out to look at her in the trunk. He even said that it was like a fisherman admiring his catch. And then he went back inside and finished his drink with his buddies. And then, like the others, he took her to his house and did the stuff. Her mother filed a missing persons report and put up missing flyers, but there were no responses. Next was Cindy Shaw on January 7, 1973. 18 years old, Ed picked her up and shot her. He took her home and snuck her body into a closet. When his mother left for work, he removed the bullet. He did stuff to her, put her in the bathtub and did that thing to her, and then threw her body off a cliff in Monterey. But he kept her head. And he buried it in the garden as if it was looking up at his mother's window, because he said, quote, "She always wanted people to look up to her," end quote. Later, some of her remains had washed up on the beach. Ed explained during interviews that he would look at his watch and tell them to hurry up so they would feel safe. They would feel like, oh, he's in a hurry. He only has time to just drop us off where we want to go, so he's not going to do anything to us. After it became known that there was a coed serial killer, the hitchhikers would talk to him about it. He said more likely than not, that's all they wanted to talk about, was the guy that was driving around picking up women and killing them. And the police, this is where the police screwed up a lot. They knew that someone was picking up and killing hitchhikers close to the college. And they told people, they warned people, and they said, don't get into cars with anybody you don't know. Don't hitchhike. However, it should be safe to get into a car with someone who has the parking sticker on their car from the college, because that means that they probably work there. Well, Ed had a sticker on his car because his mother worked there. So these girls saw the sticker and they were getting in his car because they thought, oh, the cop said if they had a sticker, it was safe. But they got that one wrong.
Even after police warnings against hitchhiking and an increased bus schedule on the campus, Kemper had no trouble picking up hitchhikers. Ironically, one warning advised riding only in cars with university stickers. Kemper's car had such a sticker.
My mother worked at the campus, and I had an A sticker on my car, and obvious access day or night to the campus. I was picking up some very lovely young women. You know what we were talking about as we're driving around? Almost as often as not, this guy that's going around doing this stuff. And the second they started talking that, they didn't realize it, but they were getting a free ride. I couldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole, I swear. You know, but they'd be telling me all about this guy, and they're comparing notes and speculating on what he looks like, how he carries himself, why he's doing this stuff, telling me about it.
Ed's still hanging out at the jury room, and he would pump his cop friends for information. None of them ever suspected that Ed was the person that they were looking for. On February 5th, 1973, Ed encountered Rosalind Thorpe and Allison Liu. Rosalind was 23 years old and Allison was 20 years old. He shot them and wrapped them in blankets. He took them home, dismembered them, and dug out the bullets. So again, he's using forensics countermeasures that he has learned at the jury room from his cop buddies. He discarded their bodies the next morning. Some remains were found in Eden Canyon 1 month later. More remains were found near Route 1 in March. He finally got around to actually killing his real target, his mother. On April 20th, 1973, he decided he was going to kill her. He came home, she wasn't home, he watched some TV, still wasn't home, so he went ahead and went to bed. He said he woke up around 4 a.m. and he noticed that his mother's light was on. He said that his mom liked to read before bed, so he figured that, oh, she's just sitting up reading a book, I'll go in there and talk to her. So she was just putting the book away and settling down for the night, and she said to him, I suppose you want to talk? And he said, no, good night, and went back to his room. And he said that was a very plausible question. She wasn't being mean or anything. That's just what they did. He would go in her bedroom at night and talk to her. He decided he was going to wait about an hour because he wanted to make sure she was asleep. At 5:15 a.m., he went back to her room. She was sleeping on her side, and Ed took a claw hammer and hit her in the side of the head. Then he took a knife and slit her throat. He dismembered her like all the others and cut out her larynx, her voice box, and he tried to put it down the garbage disposal. Apparently the voice box is very tough, so the garbage disposal couldn't chop it up and actually spit it back out. And Ed said, quote, that seemed appropriate as much as she bitched and screamed and yelled at me over so many years, end quote. Then he put her head on a shelf. He yelled at it for hours, and then he threw darts at it. So now he has to figure out what his next step is, and he says, I know. I will call my mother's best friend and invite her over for dinner and a movie. So he called Sally Hallett. If I had a friend whose son called me up and was like, you want to come over for dinner and a movie? I don't think I would take that invitation. I would think that's creepy. You know, is your mom going to be there? Why is your mom not calling me? But no, she said, okay, sure. And she went over there. So when she got there, he killed her too. He hid them in a closet. And the plan was, the reason why he killed the best friend The plan was to say, oh, well, they're on vacation together. I don't know when they'll be back. And then people wouldn't be looking for them right away because they would think they were off on vacation together. He left a note. I have seen a note, but I'm not sure if it's the actual note that he left or if it was just a handwriting sample of his. So I'm not including it, but I'm sure if you're really curious as to what the note says, that you could find it on the internet somewhere. So after he left the note, he went to Pueblo, Colorado. And I don't know why he picked Pueblo, Colorado. I don't know if he knew somebody there, always wanted to visit there, or it was just random. I have no idea. But he thought he was going to be this big deal serial killer that the giant manhunt was being done for. And he thought he would see the story all over the news, all about him. And there was nothing. And most serial killers would be like, oh, cool, I'm getting away with this. Let me go get somebody else. Not Ed. Like I said, Ed was a strange man. I should say is a strange man because he's still alive. So he called the police in Santa Cruz and confessed, told them everything he'd done. And they thought it was a prank, so they hung up on him. So then he called back and asked to speak to one of the policemen that he personally knew. And when he did that, then they went out to Pueblo and picked him up. They couldn't get him to shut up. He wanted to confess everything. He talked for a straight 6 hours. In interviews, when Ed is asked why he turned himself in, he says, quote, the original purpose was gone. It wasn't serving any physical or real or emotional purpose. It was just a pure waste of time. Emotionally, I couldn't handle it much longer. Toward the end there, I started feeling the folly of the whole damn thing, and at the point of near exhaustion, near collapse, I just said, to hell with it, and called it all off. End quote. He was indicted on 8 counts of first-degree murder on May 7th, 1973. The chief public defender was Jim Jackson, and he used the defense of NGRI, which is not guilty by reason of insanity. But Ed was found to be sane by 3 court-appointed psychiatrists. He knew what he did was wrong. He knew it was wrong to the point of trying to take himself out of the world twice while he was in jail. The trial started on October 23rd, 1973. Ed testified on November 1st. He said that he wanted to keep the bodies for possessions, and when his killer personality took over, it was like blacking out. The jury consisted of 6 men and 6 women. On November 8th, they voted guilty on all counts after deliberating for 5 hours. The defense asked for the death penalty, but there was a moratorium on the death penalty at the time, so he couldn't get it. So he is sentenced to 7 years to life for each count to be served concurrently. And I don't know why they made it concurrently. That means served at the same time. They usually order consecutively when it's this bad of a crime, just to make sure that they don't ever get out. But his is 7 years to life for each count concurrently. So that's 8 life sentences. Now, Ed had been diagnosed with antisocial, narcissistic, and schizotypal personality disorders. He's still alive and serving his sentence at California Medical Facility, part of the California Department of Corrections in Vacaville, California. Also housed there was Charles Manson and Herbert Mullen. Herbert Mullen is the other one that was active at the same time that I did the earlier episode on. Ed called him Herbie. He didn't call him Herbert. He called him Herbie. And he claims that he used behavior modification on him. According to Ed, I don't even know if this is true, but according to Ed, Herbert Mullen loved to sing, and he also loved peanuts. So he would just start singing out of the blue and drive everybody nuts. So Ed started giving him peanuts every time he asked politely if it was okay to sing. So that stopped him from just breaking out in song all the time. So Ed says, yeah, I used behavior modification on him. Ed has been up for parole several times. His next parole hearing is scheduled for next year in 2024, but he doesn't want to be paroled anymore. He likes it in there. He's made a life for himself in there, and he knows if he gets out, then he'll do it again. Since 1977, he has spent his time recording audiobooks. Among the books Kemper lent his voice to are Flowers in the Attic, The Glass Key, Merlin's Mirror, Petals on the Wind, The Rosemary Murders, Sphinx, and Star Wars. In fact, between 1977 and 1987, he spent over 5,000 hours in the recording booth, using up an estimated 4 million feet of tape. I have probably heard some of the audiobooks that he's read, which kind of gives me the creeps. He will be 75 years old in December. So I'm sorry. I hope that wasn't too disgusting. I tried to kind of water it down a little bit because, as you can probably tell, since I'm a true crime fan, I don't get like a real visceral reaction to these stories, but this one just made me want to gag. So that's everything for this week, guys. Thank you for watching, and remember, be kind to people, love your family, and I will see you next time. Bye! Don't forget to subscribe!